question will be directed at Lisa. How would you work to have GPSA grants more fairly excuse me, can I start over? How would you work to have GPSA grants more fairly distributed to departments or programs that are traditionally left out?
You know, this really starts with, it goes back to also what I've been saying all along, that information is powerful, and how we communicate that information is very important. And so I think we have a great asset with the GPSA Council, in that they represent all of the departments and schools. And so it's incumbent on those council representatives to share the information that is very important, and this is one of those areas that's very important. When you sit on the council, you have a responsibility to the organization, but you also have a responsibility to the members that you represent. So again, the information starts with the council, and as president, I had said that I would work very, very closely. In fact, I believe that the council as a legislative body really should be taking the lead in connecting the office of the president together with the departments and schools that they represent. So I think the more information people, students receive in terms of accessing resources from that GPSA is able to garner, then through that network that we have, that's where it starts. And then I also think improving our website is a work in progress. Things change, things need to be updated. People behind the computer are different. They have different ideas and more innovative. So I'm sure that there's a way in which to be able to improve the website so that it's easier to navigate, to gain the information that we need. But I think the key here, though, is that as a grant writer and as someone who's raised funds my entire professional life, what I would like to do is not only provide the information, but I'd also like to look at ways in which to complement or supplement our limited funds that we have already with leveraging funds from outside sources. There are ways to do that. When we're talking about research and promoting research opportunities, when we're promoting travel opportunities, I mean, we sit in a state with wonderful resources and organizations in the community and civic groups and private sector who are willing to support the ongoing education of our students. And so by going to them and soliciting or eliciting their support in terms of helping leverage our funds, then I think that's another way to maximize our best use of limited resources. So I really would lean a lot on the student organizations. I think that we need to make very specific presentations to the student organizations, especially those student organizations, as the question is raised, that have been historically left out of the loop. And I think that's where the president comes in. The president is the person that's going to go out there and connect all of our bodies together. Thank you.
Jacob.
Thanks. You know, my grandparents were very involved in politics for many years, and before they died, before my grandmother died, she said, you know, if you ever run for office, you know, even if it's public office, GPSA office, I guess does count. She said, don't make the mistake of talking when you don't know what you're talking about. You know, and I'll be honest, this is an issue I know nothing about. But that being said, I think that to do the Hail Mary pass and save myself, you know, I will say one thing. You know, even though I'm not clued into this specific issue, you know, I've been talking in this campaign that a lot of these questions really fundamentally boil down to a question of leadership. You know, I help run my family business. We employ 25 New Mexicans, and I run 2 small businesses on my own. One is a governmental services medium-sized firm, and the other is a financial services firm that also has a small venture capital interest. And in these 3 areas, you know, I've really been pounded into me by my mother and stepfather that you have to be client-centered. You really have to meet the needs of your client and take your marching orders from what people are asking you to do. So even though it may be troubling that I'm not going to be able to speak to specifics in this instance, I really do want to guarantee you that as a leader, my take on things is to follow the lead of the needs of my constituents, of my clients. You know, and if this really is an issue that needs to be looked at, you know, and action needs to be developed and discussed, then I think that can be on the table definitely. And you'll have an open ear and someone who's willing to engage you and work on issues that matter to you if I'm elected. Thanks.
All right. And Joseph.
Just to clarify, and you can take my time, I don't need it all. Just to clarify, were you talking about all groups on campus? Were you saying groups on campus? If you wouldn't mind reading.
So, yeah, groups that are usually left out.
Okay, great. That's what I thought. So, I don't come from a political background, but I've worked with people long enough to see what happens when people are disenfranchised, and I've experienced that firsthand, and I've worked with people who have experienced that firsthand since I was young and as a student, obviously at UNM as well. And I think that it is important to make sure that more is done to reach out to people and question why these people are disenfranchised, especially. And within the university, we have groups like that all over the place. And typically, when people are disenfranchised, they become I don't think unreasonable, but they become a little difficult to deal with sometimes with the sense that they become impassioned, and I think it's important that those passions are directed towards positive things, and I think that that's what's necessary with GPSA to do as an organization, because too often these people, these passions are raised and then they don't even have the opportunity to bring that passion to a dialogue to help promote change within the university, and I think that's a huge problem. And I think GPSA can and should do more to help facilitate that. I mean, I think the council needs to work more as a unified voice and work to get more participation in departments across the university, because GPSA was made by the university to facilitate that, and that's its main purpose, and that's the purpose of GPSA. That's what it was founded on, and that's the principles of it, and that's what it needs to be. And I don't feel like it is that way right now, and more needs to be done to ensure that. And I think GPSA's moved away from this idea that, you know, and I've said this before, and I spoke about it with Christopher when I was here with the La Raza group earlier this week. It's one thing to be diverse. You can be as diverse as you want as an organization or as a group of people on campus, but just being diverse isn't enough unless those people's voices are heard. And it's part of a bigger picture idea, and I think that that's really necessary. And I've worked with groups on campus and off campus to help facilitate those types of conversations. And I think that that should be a huge aspect of what GPSA is about, and bring not just single issues to the table, but bring a big picture idea from the conglomerate of all students on campus, because I think that we've moved away from that, and I think that that's unfortunate. And I think that there are groups that don't appreciate that, and I think more needs to be done to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future.
All right, and Katie.
So for those of you who don't know, I've been the grants chair for the past 2 years, so I better have an answer to this question. And I do. And you know, just to give you a little idea of my philosophy as grants chair, it has always been that this role of mine is a customer service job. The customer, for the most part, is probably right. So if somebody's coming to you and complaining about anything, it's your job as chair to meet the needs of the students, because ultimately grants are partially funded out of the student GPSA fee. So my attitude has been, this is the students' money. I am somehow in this position where I can facilitate turning around that money and making sure that it goes back to the students, and so I should never be an impediment to that. But I want to speak to you about three things that have happened over the past 2 years that have I've had the opportunity to make sure that these traditionally disenfranchised groups across campus actually were connected with their grants money. Firstly, I've held workshops across campus, and so I held one this spring in El Centro de La Raza's conference room. Berenice helped me with that. Also, I held one with PNMGC, I believe it was in the fall, and it, you know, unsurprisingly, when you hold a workshop in this space, it's very different than when you hold a workshop in the sub. When I hold a workshop in the sub, I see the people who applied for grants last year. When I hold a workshop in Mesa Vista Hall, I see people that I have not seen apply for grants before. And so I think that the grants position is all about making sure that the information and the opportunity gets connected with the students whose academic success can be furthered by these grants. So I've tried to do that in every aspect of my grants job. I think that another traditionally disenfranchised group on campus have been various departments. I held a workshop in PT and OT, physical and occupational therapy. And sure enough, and that happened early in the first year of my grants process, and you can track the number of PT and OT grants before I held workshops there and the number that were applying after I held workshops there. There's a direct correlation. I held them in the medical school, I held them in the law school. I've had an open invitation. Any group or department that wants to have me come to a workshop there, I have answered all of those calls and done a workshop in those locations. So I think it's about bringing the GPSA to the people and bringing the opportunity and the knowledge and the ability and the opportunity to apply for grants. The other thing that I've done is I've created an online grants application system so that students who hold jobs and have families and are, after all, we're all students, we're all extremely busy, will have more access to grants and will be able to actually apply at the last minute if they need to and not actually come to the GPSA office if they don't have to. I've had applications come in from overseas as students are studying elsewhere. And it's just a fantastic opportunity. So that's the accessibility I've brought to grants. I hope to do the same thing GPSA-wide.
Thanks. Any rebuttals?
Yeah, I think after having said all of that, there are still comments coming from student groups and organizations and departments who still feel that they're left out. And I think that this is important because it speaks to a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is these groups have not been disenfranchised just for a reason. It's been the structures within the institution that have created that disenfranchisement. So we have to look at our structures, and we have to look at our language, and we have to look at our processes to ensure that we're not following the same impediments, that we're not incorporating in the language and in the processes and in the steps things that continue to be barriers. And we have to go to those students and we have to ask them, what is it that's going to make it work? What is it? How can we make it accessible? And that has to come from those groups. That cannot come from us necessarily. It can come from me because I have the experience and the expertise to do that, but it hasn't come traditionally. And so that's what has to happen. We have to change those structures.
Jacob?
Katie just outlined for us what I thought was a pretty impressive cadre of activities meant to address this issue. And Patricia, you've said that regardless of her activities, there still exist these structures that are discriminatory. I'm wondering if you could be specific and actually pinpoint for us what you're referring to. If there are these discriminatory practices being done by the universities, that's a heavy accusation. And I think I'd like to know exactly what you're talking about.
Is this the structure of the, as outlined, questions other than the questions in the back?
Yeah, this is the rebuttal.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I mean, she's free to answer now, but I'm just concerned because I just get concerned when we start saying that people are discriminatory and that the administration has an agenda, et cetera, if we're not specific in what we're talking about.
Well, it goes back to what exactly I said. Why are the students and why are groups and departments still saying that they are not, we're not part of this? I think the law school was one of those that says they're still not having access. I think there are other departments that they're not having access. I'm saying that we have to look at the language, and maybe the grant itself needs to be revisited. Maybe the language within the grants, maybe we're not using what it is that we need to use in order to connect to those groups or to have those groups access that process. And that's what I'm saying that we need to do, and I think I said that pretty clearly. So that if there's never a system or a process that's going to be completely free of problems. But you have to take what students are telling you and you have to look at it again and revisit it. You can't say that because I was this chair or because I did this for the past 2 years that it's a perfect system. No. If the comment is still being said, then we have to go back, revisit that process, and we have to institute the changes necessary.
All right. Katie?
I just want to absolutely agree with Patricia that, just because you've been working for 2 years doesn't mean that the job is done. I mean, these are absolutely problems that we have as a society that we need to apply ourselves to, until they go away. And I hope that that's soon, but I suspect that maybe my children will also be working on those problems. So that doesn't mean that we should feel burnt out just because we've been working on it. Let's just keep going and attacking the problem. I think that there has been something structurally that I did address through the grants process was provide some protection for perspectives. So in particular, there is a perspective called critical. So if you're studying critical knowledge, particular critical race theory, you are guaranteed that one of the readers is also going to be from your same perspective. And so that's